What's your Homeowners Association horror story? When we rented, the HOA would report to our property manager and then the property manager would call us to let us know what we'd done wrong. We were reported for so many things that had nothing to do with us. We got a call that we can't have a grill on our front porch. We didn't even own a grill. We got told that we are only permitted one car parked on the street. Our other 2 cars need to be parked in the garage. We only owned 1 car at that time. We got a call that neighbors were complaining that our dogs were barking all hours of the night. We didn't have dogs, this house didn't even have a yard. The weirdest is when our property manager calls and says, "You need to move the doormat that you have leaning against your house." The husband goes outside and finds a doormat leaning against the neighbor's house. But whoever reported it, wouldn't it have been easier to just knock on the door and say something? The entire 3 years we lived in this house, the neighbors across the street used their porch as storage. As homeowners in a different neighborhood, we were written up for not taking Christmas lights down in a timely manner. It was mid-January and we'd been gone for my grandpa's funeral. So, we took them down right away as soon as we got the write-up. No warnings as is procedure, just straight to "Here's a write-up. You need to go before the board where they'll decide if you have to pay a fine." I alerted them the lights were removed. They got back to me saying we didn't remove all decorations. I had a snowman on the door that says, "Let it snow," and snowflakes in the window. Winter decorations, not Christmas. They were super snotty about it until I pointed out they'd broken their own procedure by not giving us warnings and that we felt targeted. They dropped it. A year and a half ago we redid our landscaping. The landscaper had pavers sitting in the front of the house, so it was obvious something was up. We got a letter in the mail telling us to cease and desist as we hadn't gotten HOA approval to landscape our backyard. The letter included a photo. The angle of the photo clearly showed that whoever had taken it had gone into our backyard to take it. They are not allowed to do that. I emailed them, pointing this out. They dropped it. Not necessarily horror stories, but shows what a pain in the butt an HOA can be. My mom had an HOA. The average age of the HOA was about 60 years old. At the time, I was 16. We had a community pool and my mom got HOA violation letters because I wore a bikini to a swimming pool. Odd, I thought. So, I wore a one-piece. Another letter saying the bathing suit was risque. They dropped it when my mom told them it was our high school swim team uniform and to please explain how it was provocative. Next summer, they had new rules that made it basically impossible for any kids to enjoy the pool. It soon became an old folks pool. Long story short, police did an undercover sting, and half the HOA were arrested for using it as a launching platform with their swingers club. They were arrested for lewd and lascivious actions in a swimming pool. Karma was nice that year. The pool rules were rescinded, and we got to use the pool again. As I got older, I learned a valuable lesson: never to buy a home that has an HOA. I never had an HOA, and I never intended to. Most of the time it's run by old people with a superiority complex issue. Edit, some follow-up: no, the police did not do a sting because they heard about spouse swapping. Sorry, if I miscommunicated that. The police busted several of them at the pool doing lewd things because of spouse swapping. The pool was just one meet-up. Other places were private, I suppose, since the pool one was the only place busted. They didn't ban the teenagers from the pool the following year, but they made the rules so tough we couldn't go. One rule was no more than 4 teens in the pool at any one time. It was a big pool. And all teens must be accompanied by a guardian. An actual parent or legal guardian. Our next-door neighbor was one of the guys busted, not his wife. I guess his wife was with another guy somewhere else, lol, I don't know. But I do remember one of my girlfriends always yelling in our front yard, "Is that the guy's house who got busted in the swimming pool?" That HOA officer was a retired Florida police officer and was one of the biggest influences on pushing the teens out. We were the first house in phase 2 of our subdivision. The developer got lazy and didn't file covenants for P2 until 2 months after we closed. Technically we are not subject to any restrictions. I troll them mercilessly. FB post goes out about no burning trash, time to light a fire. Second post comes out with VP threatening that he will come put out a fire at your house. Luckily it was freezing cold, so I lit a fire and reported myself at about 10 p.m., suggested he come put it out. I could go on and on and on. I hate HOAs. Edit, alright, it looks like the HOA board is up to now shenanigans. They dropped a post on the neighborhood FB page about communizing with our trash service provider. Seems reasonable, we could save some money and reduce truck traffic in the neighborhood, and with 4 different providers all noticing different days, there are always cans by the road. I was on board with the idea, until one person suggested they did not want to change, and the response from the board was basically, you will do what we tell you to do. Mom, no you won't. I am now looking into whatever permits I need to start my own trash service. Ideally I would like to buy a used garbage truck, the nastier the better, and hire some homeless people to drive the truck up and down the road in front of the HOA president's house 24/7. I'm thinking of starting a GoFundMe page for this and outfitting the trash truck with cameras for a live stream. I had just moved into my house a few months prior, when I got a letter threatening to be fined $200 stating that my mailbox wasn't black. I thought surely they had the wrong house, because my mailbox was in fact black. So, I contacted them, and they gave me a runaround arguing that it wasn't. I told them to come look and of course they said it was on me to prove to them it was black. So, I snapped a photo and emailed it to them. I heard nothing back for well over a month, then got another letter giving me a courtesy week extension before I'm fined. I'm livid at this point, so contact the HOA again asking for an explanation as to what exactly the problem is. I'm finally told that neighbors felt my mailbox was rather worn and needed to be painted or replaced. So basically, it wasn't black enough for them. So, I painted it. Now for the part that set me over the edge. After a few months or so I learned that the HOA would replace a mailbox, as it's covered under our terms. So, I called them asking about why they threatened to fine me when they were the ones that should replace it if not to standard. They stated it was because they had no open work orders for my mailbox and that it was my responsibility to notify them if it needed maintenance, not theirs. My parents live in a neighborhood with several local physicians. One has like 6 kids, and the youngest has profound autism and is nonverbal. Well, he's about 5 or 6, and he loves riding his little tricycle in their driveway, which is pretty large. He would do it for hours. His mom stayed home with him for the most part, and she and her husband became concerned that in a moment, he'd drive into the road if they happened to look away. So, they got some orange construction netting that they would just put across the end of the driveway while he was out there and would take it down when they went back inside. I always thought that it was a clever idea to keep him safe. Anyway, several of the families in the neighborhood were not pleased with this, and said it was an eyesore, so a meeting was called. It turned into attacks on how they were taking care of their son, and how it made the neighborhood look ignorant to have that netting up. Needless to say, no one offered any other options, and this family was so irate that they packed up and moved within a month. This was about 3 to 4 years ago, and that house still hasn't sold. They live out in the country somewhere, and last time I talked to the dad, the son is doing very well in his new home. And he still rides his bike for hours on end. Oh. My good friend had a story. She and the husband moved into this gated community. She loves having a birdbath in her backyard, and she gardens a lot, so the decoration makes sense. Turns out her HOA figured out that she had said birdbath in her backyard. Apparently birdbath equals lawn ornament, which was forbidden. She told them she would remove it. A week later, she gets another message saying that it hasn't been removed. It wasn't. Obviously, her and the husband put it together that the HOA is snooping in her backyard. For a week, she spends her time outside sunbathing in the nude setting her trap. Sure, enough an HOA narc opens the gate to their backyard and sees her in the nude. Instant call to the police for privacy violations. The HOA gave up and let her have a birdbath. She is now on board the HOA and they leave her alone. When we first moved in, I asked the neighbor across the street how serious the HOA was here. He said bad. And then told me a story where he got a notice with a photo of his recycle bin being left on the street for too long. The photo was of him walking from the recycling bin back to his garage. I had the HOA come out to approve a fence I was going to install. The lady at the HOA office was nice and said my plans were within the covenant bylaws, etc. We just need to have the inspector check it out himself to sign off. When he gets to my house he says he doesn't understand what I wanted to do. I explained the type of fence I wanted to install, and he said that wasn't, from his knowledge, allowed. I walk him out to the street and point 2 houses down and say, "That house, right there has the fence I want to install." He scoffs at this, walks down to look, and sure enough it was exactly as I described it. He tells me, well, we don't like to have a bunch of different types of fences in the neighborhood. I reply, I don't care what you prefer, the covenant says I can have that fence and that's what I'm going to install because it's within the specifications of the covenant. Old fella didn't have much to say after that. I got a letter the next week with approved for fence install. My HOA horror stories all revolve around dealing with them as a dispatcher. The fact that a HOA doesn't want cars parked on their street has nothing to do with whether or not it's legal to do so, and there really is no argument. The police can't legally tow a car that isn't parked in violation of any law, regardless of what you like or don't like, but they will argue and want to talk to the chief of police. I'm referring to cars parked on public streets within the neighborhood, as indicated by the statement isn't parked in violation of any law. Since parking a car on someone's private property without that person's permission doesn't apply to that statement, it's obviously not what I meant. Not my story, but my dad's. He moved into a new townhouse in summer of 2013. It was foreclosure property, as the previous tenants were kicked out for not paying their mortgage and for not paying their HOA dues. They gave everyone in the HOA new patios and decks the summer prior it was required, and you had to get a new deck/patio. Okay, the tenants had to pay for me in monthly installments in the next 3 years along with their HOA dues. As I said, the previous tenants foreclosed on their home. However, there was one rule placed when they got the decks, which was that you couldn't move out without paying off your deck first. He was told by HOA that he would not have to pay off the deck because it was foreclosed, and he was not responsible at all for paying it off. Sweet, free deck. He signed off on that. He moved in, but then he started getting assessments from the HOA for the deck. But wait, he wasn't supposed to be paying for the deck? He fought it with the board. Even with the sign saying we didn't have to pay for the deck, the board went against him. He ended up having to pay off the remaining balance on the deck. To this day, he refuses to speak about this topic. It's a trigger for him. My father-in-law's condominium corp has a shared pool. The old folks don't like to share, so they have all kinds of silly rules, like no more than 1 guest per resident, residents only times alternating every hour, etc. My FIL can't even take his own 2 grandkids for a swim because he'd exceed the number of allowed guests. So many rules the pool is usually empty. Because the residents were still breaking the rules, they passed a new rule that if any resident were caught breaking the pool rules, they would close the pool to everyone for a week and post the offender's name and reason for the closure on the community bulletin board. Not a horror story yet, but it could be. When we moved in, someone stopped by to say hi, but more like to tell us our boat can't be parked on our lot. My wife told her, well, we read all of the rules and it doesn't say that. She replied, well, I wrote the rules so I should know. My wife told her to go read them. Don't hear anything for months. When we get our annual dues packet, there is a newsletter saying our lot is in violation and that we stated plans to modify our garage to fit the boat in the spring. We never said that. They suggested setting a deadline for us and setting a vote to add boats to the list they already had: campers, fifth wheels, motorhomes, and travel trailers. Bought the house intending to build a detached garage, but in order to comply with the design rules it would cost me $90,000, so I'm waiting until I get an official anything in the mail, then I'll get a storage unit. By the way, my neighbor has been here 6 months longer than us, and they have a boat in their driveway too. Fined multiple times and threatened with a line by the HOA because we would not water our grass during a major drought season. It was cheaper and easier to fight the HOA since the city and state passed regulations banning constant watering and green grass. The city had Google-like vans with cameras that had to be driving to neighborhoods to catch violators and fine them. When I was a kid, I lived in one of the 2 front rooms of the house, which were the hottest in the summer and the coldest in the winter. My dad didn't like to use the AC, so we all just had fans. One summer it got so unbearably hot in my room that fans just weren't cutting it and I was miserable. My dad then put an AC unit in my window, and it was awesome. But it was short-lived because the HOA told us to take it down because it was an eyesore. My parents told them it was for their child, but they didn't care, so my parents had to take it down. The kicker is that, just down the street, a guy who had the exact same model house as we had an AC unit installed in the same exact window as the one we had it in, and the HOA never said a word to him. My mother died in September of 2016. My disabled father went into the hospital and then long-term rehab until the present. The house was in my mom's name and their neighbor across the street is the treasurer of the HOA. He knew my mom died of cancer within a year of her diagnosis and that my dad was in the hospital. He billed my dead mother for a year and when the bills were unpaid, he took it to court to begin foreclosure proceedings. At this point, I received a certified letter and contacted a lawyer to help. It was originally $1,700 but increased to $4,200 with late fees and attorney fees. Our lawyer is confident we can settle for far less than $4,200. Didn't happen to me personally, but I guess I can tell you about my parents' experience with their HOA. Dad retired and decided that he really wanted to buy a camper and travel. Mom was all about it, both of them excited. So, Dad runs off and trades his F-150 truck for a F-250 with a biased diesel V8, buys a gooseneck camper, and waits for spring. Camper in the backyard, truck in the garage, no big deal. Not long after he gets a visit from a lady. She's got a list of rules from the HOA that was established long after my parents had built their house, something like 15 years later when the subdivision really took off, saying that Dad couldn't have the camper on his property because it was an eyesore. Mind you, this camper is in the backyard, behind a 6-foot privacy fence. You could still see it, sure, but it's not like it was old and in disrepair either. So, here's my retired parents, living in a subdivision that has an HOA that was established long after they built their home, and the HOA is expecting them to abide by rules they didn't agree to. He never moved the camper. Not mine, but a friend's HOA. Was watching a friend's house/cat while she was away, left my car at her house, in her deeded spot, with a visitor tag on it, to drop her off at the airport, then went home to my house, slept, went to work, returned after work the next day to feed cat, check mail, and get my own car back. No car. Call her on vacation, she finds property management phone, I call, they tell me it was towed as it had a flat tire. $290 later, for tow, overnight storage, and a flat fix, I had my car back. The car wasn't even there 24 hours, and it wasn't flat when I parked it. Not mine, but one of my good friends has a rather insane HOA. They actually used rented surveying equipment to determine that his clothesline was 1 inch taller than his fence and fined him several $100s for some stupid structure beyond the fence rule they had. The same HOA has someone walking around actually measuring the length of grass with a ruler and issuing warnings for mowing. My HOA decided that my trim needed to be painted right now. Threatened a $100 a month fine if it wasn't. The trouble is that it was January, and I live near Chicago. As I was buying the paint, the salesperson kept telling me that the paint wouldn't dry, it would just freeze, and fall off within 6 months. I was selling it in the spring anyway, so I didn't care. Painted the trim in a temperature of 7 degrees Fahrenheit. I went away for a long weekend and left after work on Thursday. Late Friday afternoon, my water heater burst, in the attic of a 3-story home, and flooded my entire townhouse. When my neighbor got home from work he saw gallons of water running from underneath my garage door. When he realized I wasn't home, he tried to find my phone number and when he couldn't, he called the HOA to notify me. The lady that answered said that since it was after business hours, it was 5:01 at this point, the matter would have to wait until Monday. My wonderful neighbor ended up calling the non-emergent police line and they came and shut my water off from the street. When I got home Sunday morning, my entire house was damaged, and I could see my attic from my basement. After a massive panic attack and a frantic call to my insurance company, we started the process of repairs. The cherry on top was that I needed to have a dumpster placed in my driveway and a moving pod to remove what was left of my furniture while they began drying out the house and I got a visit from the HOA. They didn't like how unsightly my home had become and wanted these items removed from my driveway. I essentially told them that they could take their complaints and go duck themselves with them. I got a little revenge too because I stopped paying their stupid fee since they couldn't find me before 6 months, and I was moving in less than 5 months. I'll never own another home with a HOA ever again. My brother lives in a neighborhood with a strict HOA. His neighbor, 27-year-old woman, passed away in a tragic accident leaving behind her husband and 3 children. HOA fined the family because the people visiting the family for the funeral couldn't all fit in the driveway, so some parked on the side of the street. When we moved in, we got permission to build a fence. They said cedar treated pine was fine. Well, a neighbor didn't like that and called HOA. We got an email shortly thereafter from HOA Press that there were some concerns about our wood, so we came by really quick to give it a good sniff to see if it was, in fact, not cedar. He is now King Fence Sniffer. Our HOA hired a management company to run the day-to-day business. What that meant was a guy would ride around taking pictures of petty bad and mailing violations to homeowners. I had so many quarrels over nothing. Well, it turns out the HOA didn't have any teeth behind the violations since the bylaws didn't allow fines. Somebody came up with the bright idea to start imposing fines to ensure compliance. That is when I ran for and won the vice presidency of the board. Another gentleman who was fed up with this ran and won as well. We didn't have the power to dissolve the HOA, but we decided the next best thing was to paralyze it. Without us in attendance, the board could never reach quorum to conduct business. And they never did. Not me, but my sister. Her front door broke because some delivery people ducked up and she had it replaced. Apparently it was the wrong color according to the HOA, and she would be fined $500 a week unless it's corrected or removed, because it's fine to not have a front door in LA. Another is from a sweet old lady that invited me in for tea and cookies when I was house hunting. The HOA there was $285 a month, the low average for social, and she told me that while she didn't mind the committee so much, she wasn't happy when 2 of her potted plants were shattered by kids playing ball around her house, and the HOA wanted to fine her $65 a day until she has them removed from her front yard. I ended up buying a home without HOA. A young married couple finds their first apartment, and although it is far from perfect, it is spacious and 2 minutes away from work. Mind you, this is the beginning of August, in South Florida. On the day we move in, we see a letter posted for the HOA stating that someone has to be present in our unit while the workers are there to work on the central cooling unit. Okay, no big deal, I have the ability to work from home sometimes, so I did. Well, at the end of those 2 days, workers were to be there from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., we were told that the project was bigger than expected, and found out exactly what was happening. They were replacing the piping of all 22 units in our complex, and we were lucky enough to have one of 2 points of access to the roof, in our bedroom closet. That roof access was utilized for 24 days out of the month of August, anywhere from 1 to 14 hours a day. When we were privately renting in a townhome community, the dumpster had video surveillance so that the HOA could find anyone breaking the rules as far as what we were allowed to dump. One day both I and So get a call from our property manager alerting us that HOA has fined us $250 for illegal dumping. The property owner will have to pay it and we will have to reimburse him. After racking our brains about what we could have possibly thrown out that wasn't allowed, we decided to call up the HOA to see if we could see the video. They would either transfer us to someone else that would hang up, or their hours would change to when no one would answer the phone, or they'd promise to get the video to us the next day, etc. This went on for about 2 weeks. Finally, my So got to see the video while I was at work. I texted him to find out what was on it, and he said the video was of a middle-aged Asian lady throwing out a bunch of furniture. It was the stupid property owner's freaking wife. Not an HOA, but an obnoxious neighbor we had growing up. We had a long backyard that bordered on the back line of several other people's yard. This one guy was a real piece of work and complained about everything. The important things I remember. My younger brother had a camping-themed birthday party, and my dad made a small fire for us all to roast s'mores, like, for logs, about 100 yards from any structure or property line. Neighbor called the fire department to report an illegal fire. The fire department shows up and has to drive around the block 3 times before they even get a whiff of smoke. Firefighters come to the backyard, tell my family they're not doing anything wrong, and doing everything right, as well, and share a birthday s'more while the neighbor glares from his backyard. Part of our property included a dry stormwater detention pond, kinda like this. My dad would mow the grass and spray in a baseball diamond. We'd put our soccer nets down there, and it was the only sledding hill in the neighborhood. The neighbor starts complaining to the EPA that my dad was disrupting the natural wetlands habitat of a fabricated retention basin in a 10-year-old subdivision. The EPA told my parents of the complaint because it was so ridiculous. The neighbor gets mad because one of the pine trees we planted along the border of his fence was growing too big and was encroaching on his property line. He insisted that we transplant it. Fair enough, we moved the tree. That summer, the neighbor's pumpkin patch started growing through the fence onto our yard. This guy was really in his garden. My dad didn't say a word. A few weeks after the pumpkins started growing and really started looking nice, my dad we'd whacked the vines of all of the ones that had grown on our side of the fence and chucked the pumpkins over the hill. I wanted to tear out a bunch of evergreen bushes that ran alongside my house. We tore them out and were debating on whether to burn them on site or put them in a burn pile that I knew about 10 miles or so away. I opted to just burn them right there. I have an open area next to my house that is about 1 lot size. We put the bushes in the open, ran a garden hose out to the area in case it spread. Then I decided that I should get a burn permit. So, I printed one off and took it to my fire station to be signed. I came back and put the burn permit on my steps and set the fire. The bushes were fairly green, so they didn't want to burn aside from the initial flame up. I needed some accelerant. So, I ran to the dollar store and grabbed some cheap lighter fluid. Came back and my friend tells me that some HOA member came by and told us that we couldn't burn things. He said that he didn't care and was calling the fire department. About then, I hear the fire trucks getting closer. HOA member pulls up to see what transpires between me and the fire department. Fire truck pulls up, sees us doing everything right. They turned off the lights and sirens and waved at us. HOA members peel out and leave. We all laugh. HOA said there was a surplus of funds and sent out a survey to find out what people want the money spent on: swimming pool, basketball court, etc. A few months later we got notice that they're raising the dues because they need more money to afford all the new amenities we requested. The entire board was voted out the following year. When my brother first moved into his condominium, quiet hours were 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Sunday through Thursday, never really enforced. A couple of years later 2 board members sold, 2 new came on board. One being a 60-year-old man. Quiet hours are now 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Sunday through Thursday, 10-6 Friday through Saturday. The 60-year-old guy will knock on your door if he thinks you are too loud. It's a young metro neighborhood, loft complex. The old guy came to his door to complain a couple of weeks ago because he thought the pizza delivery guy was too loud. Maybe a covenant issue, not simply a HOA, you decide. This one shaped my youth. My family was in the military, so we moved around every 4 years growing up and lived primarily on base housing. That is, until we moved from Georgia to Michigan. Lots of differences in the 2 states, a lot less southern hospitality fare, sure. My parents moved into a nice subdivision that was an offshoot of a nicer subdivision. There were no signs for our less nice subdivision, but with the lot size and general attitude of neighbors towards each other and their own lawns you could tell the difference. Well, just after I graduated high school my parents decided to move around the corner, to a nicer subdivision, and a much nicer house and bigger lot. This is where the trouble began. This subdivision had a lake, so you were either a lake person or not, again, smooth divisions that were palpable in the neighborhood. The board for the subdivision had a clear agenda, creating a park-like atmosphere, and had recently begun implementing decisions based on aesthetics and some newish bylaws they had enacted. The problem was these bylaws affected my parents' plan to put in a fence and pool in their backyard. The bigger problem was they enacted the bylaws incorrectly and never recorded them. Their true problem was that after finishing the military my mom had gone on to become a teacher and then later got her law degree. So, when they posted a cease and desist notice for our backyard renovations my mom called bullish. My dad's response was I'd like to see them try it when they declared they would tear down our fence. Mind you, this is where things got to. but my family tried appeasement for a while before implementing the GFY approach. This board was simply implacable. In Michigan you have to have a fence if you want a pool. It's a safety/liability thing. The people with lake houses didn't need fences and thought they were offensive to see and against their park aesthetic. So, my parents offered to put a really nice fence up, not some chain link thing, still no. Other people have similar issues with the board, offering many solutions only to be denied. It was clear this power-tripping board just didn't want fences and thought they had the power to decide. It got so bad that another homeowner lost the sale of their house because a new buyer with small children couldn't get approval for any kind of fence in their wooded lot. After hearing others' horror stories and seeing the pushback from the board, my parents decided on the nuclear approach and implemented it. Construction on an expensive white vinyl fence began, finished, and the pool equipment was on the way when we received the stop order notice. Then I got to witness something that still brings a tear to my eye. See, these people had been puffing themselves up for months over this. They even went and hired an attorney to put a stop to us. This attorney invited everyone to sit down. Not in someone's living room, no, they rented a boardroom out at a local eatery. My dad said he didn't want anything to do with this, knowing he had a temper problem and his 12-gauge he casually refers to as his southern hospitality would not be welcome, and asked that I go with Mom to provide backup. Not realizing what I was about to witness, I blithely agreed and showed up in my polo shirt and cargo pants. Everyone else is in suits and ties. The full board of old pissed-off dudes is sitting there waiting for us when we arrive. My mom sits down, they start talking about costs and resolving and how they had to hire a lawyer and she'll have to pay for that because she created this problem, and she just cuts them off. What makes you think you have any legal right to impose this rule, she says. They all turn to their attorney. Ma'am, we had a vote. Then my mom does it. She takes out the recorded bylaws and flops them on the table and says, "Really? 'Cause it's not in here." Awkward moment of silence. Papers rifled through. Stammering. My mom, seeing the opportunity, continues, "See, what I think happened is you had a vote, but it was wrong. These bylaws require a majority of the lots to vote in favor for a change to be made. You had a majority of the votes cast, not a majority of the total lost. So, what you really had was a plurality, and that vote never passed. You can see the rules for voting here," points out Paige, "and you can see that the rule was never changed in the official bylaws either. Probably because it never passed. And now, none of you have bothered to even read or follow the bylaws, and you're trying to impose them on me. Well, I can tell you that's not gonna happen. Thank you, gentlemen, I will not be paying a dime for any of this or your attorney. Have a good day." Then she gets up, looks at me like "Get the F***ck up, son," and marches out. They actually had the gall to try to hand her an invoice for the lawyer as she walked out, and she just waved it off. And that was the day I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. Serving fools like that, my mom showed me what it was to stand up to those who would let power go to their head. My family moved to a new neighborhood when I was in kindergarten. My dad had built an amazing playhouse for me and my siblings. It had miniature windows, a miniature door, working lights, even AC. It was basically a tiny house before tiny houses were a thing. It was beautiful. He had built it on cinder blocks so that we could move it to our backyard of our new house once we moved. Perfect, right? Nope. The Homeowners Association refused to let us bring it, citing that the neighborhood doesn't allow tool sheds because apparently they are an eyesore. Backyard playgrounds are fine, but somehow our playhouse didn't qualify as a playground. Me and my younger sisters were devastated. I remember crying and crying because I couldn't keep the playhouse that my dad worked so hard on. Hell, I'm 24 years old and I still tear up when I think about it. Why did anyone care so badly that they'd deny some kids their playhouse? I still drive by our old house once a year or so. The new owners haven't taken care of it, and it's fallen into disrepair. I have other stories about our HOA, such as how we were frozen out for having a non-traditional house color, gray. It was gray, and a woman who used to walk around the neighborhood with a clipboard to write people up for offenses that shouldn't matter. The fake HOA in our neighborhood started off as a neighborly gesture. Cheap $75,000 a year. Cleared the roads, some spring dumpsters, a summer barbecue. Then the bored homemaker who had nothing better to do became president of the HOA. The elections, meetings, and of course raised the HOA fee 200%. She talked about new street signs, new roads, sidewalls, and gates into the entrance of the neighborhood. Mind you, our home was the original property back in the 1940s. I assume the owners sold off land for the homes around us. No public areas, neighborhood pool, park, trails, nothing. I refused to pay or be any part of the little HOA club. She called as I was past due on my HOA fees. I politely told her there is no HOA here, that is why we bought this home. She asked if we used the roads, and I said yes, of course. Her response was, well, you need to pay to use my roads. I told her I do, it's called property tax. I asked her to never contact me again. Funny, some participate in the HOA. They just put in $15,000 worth of stop signs. We have 5 intersections. She wants to resurface the over 1 mile road now. Good luck with that. I'll gladly be the one they hate who hangs her laundry out to dry. Do not buy in an HOA. My very first place in college that I didn't rent was a townhouse condominium. Typical cookie cutter, 3-storied, 4 to a section, little cut out of suburbia for beginners. I lived near the back of the development. This meant driving by / past the front units every day to get to and from work and school. Our HOA board president, Sonia, lived across the street from our HOA treasurer, Zelda. Sonia was in her 30s, ran an illegal daycare out of her home, and I hated driving by her house after 3 p.m. or on weekends because her 2 elementary-aged kids would hide behind parked cars and run in front of your vehicle screaming, "Slow down." I got really scared after this happened a few times and only drove 5 miles per hour through there, and the petty things kept doing it. I spoke with their mom about how unsafe jumping in front of cars was. I'm only going 5 miles per hour because I'm terrified and they're basically harassing me and our neighbors weekly. Sonia says her kids are being neighborhood monitors and I should be thankful for their diligence. WTF? A week later at 7 p.m., after most of the residents are home, mostly young families, I pull in after working my retail job after class. I noticed a tow truck. Then 2. Then there. They're towing everyone in the neighborhood. I park in my garage and run upstairs and tell my roommates to move their cars from the street parking. They run out and sure everyone who parked on the street is getting towed. There's 2 of my neighbors fighting with the 2 drivers that they've always parked there. It's a parking area, it's in our homeowners booklet. We whip it out and the tow truck drivers say they're just following the orders of Sonia and they leave when the police show up. Sonia put up home printed paper signs and signed a contract with the tow company in the middle of the day without telling anyone. The police officers advised all residents that tomorrow this would be effective, but that the homemade signs Sonia made were not legal and there were no posted no parking signs. Guys. That night she was out in the street with a red bucket of paint painting the curb red. She had the tow company post their tow signs and no parking signs the next afternoon. Goodbye street parking. Now anyone who didn't fit in the garage had to park 3 blocks away, outside the condominium units. The next straw was when one day 4 large evergreen trees were cut down from a communal park in the development. Old lady and treasurer Zelda found out Sonia had paid her sideman, who was also an arborist, over $8,000 of HOA money to cut these trees down. Without any discussion or approval from the HOA board. Zelda flipped herself on the next HOA meeting, let everyone know what happened to the trees and how Sonia spent our HOA money away. We were planning for a community co-op garden. After the 6 o'clock meeting, I guess someone else on the board called Sonia to let her know that she was going to be removed from the HOA president's seat due to the unapproved expenses, towing issue, and more. Well, at about 8 p.m. I hear screaming. Like, blood-curdling screams from a woman, "Help! Call the police!" Reddit, it's Zelda. She's outside her condominium fucking screaming. Sonia came over, punched the 70-year-old Zelda in the face, pulled her out of her own home, locked her out, and was now threatening to harm Zelda's disabled and bedridden elderly husband who was upstairs. Zelda's hysterical. I'm on the phone with the police, about 5 neighbors are also outside on the phone with the police, Zelda's screaming every curse word in the book through her own front door at our crazy ex-HOA president. Sonia was arrested that night for some crazy things like assault and holding someone hostage. Since Sonia was a single parent, her kids were taken away by relatives about an hour after CPS showed up. Zelda had this gnarly black eye and huge scratches on her chest where I guess Sonia clawed her shirt and pulled her into the haymaker. I only lived there 14 months and moved due to the escalating issues with the HOA. October 2016, my condominium started to collapse. We were forced to leave, and officially homeless for a year, with a card from the Red Cross and everything. The HOA did nothing. No one would admit to anything, explain anything, or contact us at all. For a year we waited. When we were finally told the building was structurally sound again, we moved back in, only to be told a week ago that we have to get out and get everything we own out for a month while they do repairs, sometime this spring. Worst of all, we were required to keep paying our HOA fees through the entire thing. The only way owners were offered non-payment was if we signed a document promising not to sue anyone. Never again with a condominium, never again with an HOA, and never again with River Towers in Alexandria, Virginia.